USAID is clearly in the job of trying to bring about regime change. It has secret bank accounts, shell companies.
USAID gets $50 billion a year in U.S. taxpayer money. That's a larger overt fund than the CIA has.
USAID perhaps is the new CIA.
Have we ever tried to meddle in other countries' elections?
Oh, probably.
Establishment never thought this stuff would come out. They thought this would just go on forever, and the country would go totally bankrupt, and the very same central banks that have gotten control of our government would then come in and take full control.
Through USAID over the past several years, these are some of the insane priorities that organization has been spending money on. $1.5 million to advance DEI in Serbia's workplaces, $70,000 for a production of a DEI musical in Ireland, $47,000 for a transgender opera in Colombia, $32,000 for a transgender comic book in Peru. I don't know about you, but as an American taxpayer, I don't want my dollars going towards this crap, and I know the American people don't either, and that's exactly what Elon Musk has been tasked by President Trump to do, to get the fraud, waste, and abuse out of our federal government. Thank you, guys.
As my colleague said, it's not only a gift to our adversaries, but trying to shut down the Agency for International Development by executive order is plain illegal.
I mean, my frustration with USAID goes back to my time in Congress. It's a completely unresponsive agency. It's supposed to respond to policy directives of the State Department, and it refuses to do so.
We talked about Trump wanting to be a dictator on day one, and here we are. This is what the beginning of dictatorship looks like.
Let me get this straight. Fauci's NIAID and USAID sent over $40 million in U.S. taxpayer support to scientists in Wuhan who was working on bat coronavirus research, who also became patient zero for COVID-19, which they also then owned the vaccine patents for. Yeah, premeditated.
Ms. Powers, did USAID fund coronavirus research in Wuhan, China?
We did not fund gain-of-function research,
That's not the
as
question.
you know.
The question is, did you fund coronavirus research in Wuhan, China?
Before my time, there was the PREDICT program with which you're familiar, which ended in China in 2019.
Yeah, this is a $200 million program, and the GAO has also identified that some of these grants went directly to the Wuhan Institute of Virology, where there is a suspicion that the lab leak began the pandemic. Has USAID awarded funds to the Academy of Military Medical Sciences in China?
Not to my knowledge, but I'd have to get
I think the answer is once again yes. GAO has found that there have been subawards of NIH money as probably as well as USAID money that went to the Academy of not just medical research, military medical research in China.
USAID is a key component of the U.S. government's regime change operations worldwide. USAID spends billions of dollars every year propping up NGOs overseas that function as shadow governments, eating away at elected governments that the U.S. interventionists want to overthrow. Behind most U.S. foreign policy disasters overseas, you will see the fingerprints of USAID. From Ukraine to Georgia and far beyond, USAID is meddling in the internal affairs of foreign countries, something that would infuriate Americans if it was happening to us.
Today, staffers for the U.S. Agency for International Development, known as USAID, were told to stay out of the Washington, D.C. headquarters. USAID staffers said they tracked 600 employees who reported being locked out of the agency's computer systems overnight. USAID security chiefs were placed on leave after refusing to turn over classified material in restricted areas.
An unelected shadow government is conducting a hostile takeover of the federal government. Friday night, the so-called Department of Government Efficiency, led by billionaire Elon Musk, gained access to the Treasury Department's entire system of payments, including Social Security and Medicare benefits and Americans' tax refunds.
And that is only a snapshot. That in and of itself is irrevocably discrediting and devastating the entire globalist, not just here, but worldwide, money laundering, political control system of the tax-free foundations, the NGOs, the CIA, the State Department, and their counterparts in other Western countries.
So what is USAID? When people hear the name USAID, they focus on aid. They focus on thinking like it's humanitarian work. But aid is not actually in the name of USAID. USAID stands for the United States Agency for International Development, not aid. It's not a charity. And international development is simply capacity building. It is local and regional capacity building done across the whole world, i.e. internationally. The primal id in USAID, international development, is about capacity building of assets that can be used by either the Pentagon, the State Department, or the CIA for their own activities. So if you're the Secretary of State and you were asked by the National Security Council or the President to do something in a different country, overthrow their government, how would you do that? And the first thing that I said is you would look at the assets that already exist in the country. Do we need new assets in addition to the ones that we currently have, or are the existing assets, can they achieve this simply by giving them enough money, giving them enough resources, giving them enough training, giving them enough support? One of the main ways that capacity building would be financed would be through USAID. USAID would say that it's doing something, funding a hospital system, funding universities, funding civil society organizations, funding media institutions, funding independent media in the region. Sorry, it's something in my eye. Independent media in the region on USAID payroll. And those institutions, those assets, would then be bigger and more powerful and more capable, more capable of serving the State Department's goal, aka advancing U.S. national interests.
There are riots it's called the Maidan Rebellion in Ukraine, which we're not told that we are financing those riots. The newspapers never told us, our government never told us. U.S.AID, which is a CIA front, put $5 billion into funding those riots. Those riots lead to a coup d'etat against the first democratically elected government of the Ukraine. It was a government that refused to choose sides and to say we're going to be on the side of the West. So we wanted them out. A month before that government is overthrown, Victoria Nuland, who's the part of the centerpiece of the neocon ideology and who is now a high-level official in the State Department, has a secret call with the U.S. ambassador, which is tape recorded and is now public, which anybody can go and look up, where she is picking the new cabinet for the Ukraine, which is which is a U.S. Western cabinet. So they're picking the new government a month before the old government is overthrown.
Is that how democracy? Is that democracy when Victoria Nuland picks your government?
In terms of sort of the process moving ahead, we want to keep the moderate Democrats together. The problem is going to be Tony Book and his guys. And, I'm sure that's part of what Yanukovych is calculating on all of this.
I think Yats is the guy who's got the economic experience, the governing experience. He's the guy, what he needs is Klitsch and Tony Book on the outside. He needs to be talking to them 4 times a week. I just think Klitsch going in, he's going to be at that level working for Yatsenyuk. It's just not going to work.
Trump didn't just freeze the $3 trillion in the NGO slush funds last week, and then some low-level federal judge blocked it for now. And Musk and Trump said, that's fine. We're already in control of the payment systems, and almost all this is totally illegal. And so we're just blocking all these payments ourselves at the executive level. And we're just going to expose it all to the light of day.
Mark Moyer, he's a U.S.AID whistleblower, and he joins me now. So, Mark, you started at U.S.AID, and what'd they do the first thing? Did they send you to DEI camp?
Yes, and great to be with you, Jesse. So I didn't get into the agency till February 2018, and this is one of the big differences that we're already seeing. That in 2017, Trump administration was very slow to get into the agency. So I get there in February, and we have what's called a privilege walk as part of the orientation, where you are given an identity. Now, I was a Scandinavian woman, and so when they read lines like, I get discriminated against because of government services, or people don't look how I look. So you took a step forward if it applied and if it didn't. And so I ended up near the front, and the indigenous woman with unwanted pregnancy and the male prostitute were at the other end, and then we talked about our privileges.
All right, so you were trained to be a Scandinavian woman. in a privilege walk, not root out corruption. What kind of disguises do they use to fund these projects? I mean, do they just change the names of these things? Is there really some other reason we're doing this?
Yeah, they're very effective at rebranding things. So in the first Trump administration, the priorities were support national interests, as they are now. Another thing was countering terrorism and promoting self-reliance. So I went to a country, just to give one example, they had a feminist women's book club that had been started under the Obama administration, and then they now said this is a counter-terror program because women, feminist women are key fighters in the battle against terrorism.
Oh, yes, yes. What happened when you raised concerns that this thing was just a big corrupt money pit?
Yeah, so I reported one of my subordinates for criminal conflict of interest, and I mean, the first discouraging sign was I was told, well, you know, that's nice you want to do that. Most people here don't want to report corruption. Now, they didn't tell me why. I later figured out it's because you get in a lot of trouble. So I was accused of publishing classified information in something I'd written 2 years earlier, which had never been subjected to any prior question. And so they ultimately used that to fire me. Now, the people who were engaged in the corruption managed to hold on to their jobs. And so there's a culture of corruption that says, if you are going to criticize anything corrupt, we're going to come after you. And we're going to use the tools that are supposed to be used to go after criminals to come after you. So they ended up firing me based on this bogus accusation. And I've been in court for the last 3 years trying to get them to turn over the facts. And this is, of course, what we've seen with a lot of cases with Senator Ernst, for example. They refuse to turn over information to the courts or to members of Congress. And so this is why people are fed up.
So they stonewall and then they weaponize classified information to take you down. That sounds quite familiar. How do you think DOJ is doing so far uncovering this fraud inside USAID?
Well, from what I've seen so far, they seem to be doing a good job. You know, I do think you're going to need forensic accountants to go in there. It's probably going to take a long time because these bureaucrats have devised very crafty ways to hide money. So I was there in 2019, more than 2 years after the Trump administration came in the first time. We were still finding programs that the political appointees didn't know about. Now, you'd think you'd go in and say, okay, guys, tell us where the money is, but somehow, you know, that they will come up with some excuse why they didn't give it to you. And that's partly why I think you're seeing this more heavy-handed approach, because the people there were so good the first Trump term at hiding things from us and mislabeling them and slow rolling them. And, you know, you also, I think the first term, some of the Trump appointees were frankly not as vigilant as they should have been. It seems like now there's a much stronger effort and a more concerted effort to go in and get all of the information.
My stuff.